you don't have to go anywhere to find the holy. It is right under your feet. In fact, I was in Meijer a few days ago, and I was going through one of the sections of the store. But I was going through the sort of the home decor section, and I noticed these boxes that it was like a kit. And in the kit, you would get sort of this plate, or it was like a tray, and then you could place on that. It had like a vase, and then it had a couple of candles, and then some small stones, and then one flat stone that had a word on it. And one of the boxes, the word was happiness, and then a different box that you could buy had the word wish on it. And it looked like that these were sort of home altars where you could buy this and have this sort of altar or sacred space or shrine or whatever it is for the low, low price of $19.99. And I thought that was so interesting that in this place that there's this, they're marketing, or they're trying to sell us something that is deep within us, this impulse to be able to mark the sacred, to be able to recognize the sacred, and to be able to have that in our home. So this is Locally Sourced Spirituality, and this is episode 5, and it's part 2. Last week was part 1 of Recognizing God. This is part 2. Last week, I just let you listen to my conversation with my friend Charlotte. And I didn't really preface it too much, and I tried to keep myself out of it because I just wanted you to hear her story. I wanted you to hear how she recognizes God and how she identifies God in her life. And I wanted you to hear that it's not always obvious, it's not always perfect. Sometimes there's doubt, sometimes there's struggle, but Charlotte is one of those people that is honest about when she does recognize God and when she does not feel God's presence. Now, she would never call herself this, but I would say that she is a mystic. Now, a mystic, I just do a quick definition search on my device, and the first thing that came up was a person who seeks by contemplation and self-surrender to obtain unity with or absorption into the deity or the absolute. So someone who is intentional about by contemplation, someone who intentionally self-surrenders to find unity with that which is eternal, that which is what we call God, that which is what some people call the ground of being. I'm thinking of a character in the Rogue One movie that was out in the fall of 2016, where there's that temple guard character who would repeat the mantra, I am one with the Force and the Force is with me. I am one with the Force and the Force is with me. He was intentional about trying to become or obtain unity with the Force, which is that myth's word for the deity, the divinity, the absolute. But the thing is about that definition and that character is that these are people who would claim to be mystics. And I'm always suspicious of people who claim to be mystics, who set themselves apart as being more spiritual or differently spiritual, that creates a circle around themselves and say that they are this and the rest of us are something else. I'm not suspicious of mystics. I'm suspicious of people who claim to be mystics. Now, if someone were to tell me that someone else was a mystic, I would be interested to go find them and talk to them and hear their story, because they are people who likely have an experience of God that they would be hopefully willing to share. And that is what we're all about, right? We can experience the divine where we are. We can experience God where we are. And when we experience God, we should share it, so that when other people experience God or have an idea or think they might have experienced the presence of the divine, they can remember our story and maybe by comparison or by contrast, know that the holy is present with them in that moment. So my friend Charlotte, that I had you listen in on last week, that conversation, she's humble. She even asked me, why would anyone want to hear from me? And I just asked her to tell her story, because she blurs the lines between the love of God and the love of others. And she does that nicely. And in my tradition, in the Christian tradition, it says that God is love, and that we show how we love God by how we love each other. And Charlotte does that really well. There's a book that I have. I'm probably going to just slaughter the pronunciation of this book, but it's the Tawasin of Mansur al-Hallaj. Okay, this is a mystic from the 800s and 900s AD, and the subtitle of this book is A Mystical Treatise on Knowing God and Invitation to the Dance. I love that. It's the writings of Mansur al-Hallaj, interpreted in poetry by Jabez L. Van Cleef. And so there's this, they're divided into chapters, and there's this one part that I love, and it's about comparing this journey of self-surrender to God, of finding unity with God or the divine, to the way a moth is attracted to a flame, or in modern terms, the way moths are attracted to bug zappers. But that's not quite the same. But it's a truth of our modern lives. So I'm going to read you just a little portion of this. The moth cavorts about the flame until at morning dawn will come. Then the moth must return to find the others of his own moth kind. So he's hanging around this flame that he is just attracted to, but then he goes and finds his moth friends, and it continues, and tell them of his spiritual bent. He needs to tell them that he's just taken with this flame. Expressions, however eloquent, in a coquetry of the fire, he mingles in his own desire. He strives to reach perfect union, flirting with his own destruction. The light of the flame is knowledge of reality's wavering edge. So I know that this author is from a different tradition, but in Christianity, it makes me think when they say the light of the flame is knowledge. I'm reminded of our story, of the story from the Christian tradition, the Jewish tradition of Adam and Eve, the beginnings, the story in Genesis. And I read the desire of Adam and Eve to acquire knowledge. So it's like the story is continuing, that it's woven into who we are. It's almost like it's not something that just happened once upon a time, but it's something that happens continually. And that we're still craving that knowledge. We're craving that unity with the ultimate. And so continuing with the poem, tasting its deadly mystery, the truth of reality. So there's consequences. There's consequences to this desire, this going past what is safe and understanding what the ultimate reality really is. We would be giving up something. Had to leave the garden, had to leave the safety and security of being in the continual presence of the divine and go out into the unknown. So in tasting its deadly mystery, the truth of reality, the moth, not satisfied with light, even more hungers for the heat. So it's not just seeing, not just being aware, but really desires to be a part of it. And so this section that I'm going to finish reading says, he leaps into the flame and burns, to his fellows never returns. So we can take this in a concrete way of, just literally losing our lives and sacrificing ourselves, but I don't think that's the point. It's about never being the same again. It's about being transformed. It's about having unity with the divine. And you can never go back to the way you were. Once you know something, you can't unknow something. It's like a spiritual rebirth. It's like being born again into a new way of living. So I was talking with my friend Charlotte, And she has this moment. If you remember back from last week, there's this date in the early 70s where she has this understanding, this realization, this epiphany, and she marks time by that date. Life was one way before then, and life is a new way the other. She went to the flame, she went to that understanding, and she was transformed. And I asked her, if you listen again, I asked her about some of the things in her home, and she showed me some extra things, but she has a way of taking things in her life, taking concrete objects that remind her of love for God, love for her husband, and she sets them in a particular way. She sets them in prominent places so that she can remind herself of that love. And that reminds me of a text in the Hebrew Scriptures, the Old Testament of the Bible. And it's in Samuel. See, in the whole Old Testament, there's this sort of collection of history books, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, and it sort of takes you through sort of a history, but it's also the history of Israel's relationship with God. And it's this early understanding of the relationship with God that we see. We see how it changes and evolves. There's this part where they're about ready to go into battle, and they're worried, or they're concerned, or they're wanting to have God's favor. They're wanting to have victory. And so before the battle, Samuel, the judge, the leader that time of Israel, said, "Gather all Israel at Mizpah, and I'll pray to the Lord for you." So they gathered at Mizpah and drew water and poured it out before the Lord. They fasted that day and said, "We have sinned against the Lord." And Samuel judged the people of Israel at Mizpah. So they're saying, they're like being honest, like we have failed. We're not in alignment. We're not connected. We're not even anywhere close to what we should be. We're not even close to the flame, or however you want to say it. We've gotten off track. When the Philistines heard that the people of Israel had gathered at Mizpah, the lords of the Philistines went up against Israel. And when the people of Israel heard of it, they were afraid of the Philistines. The people of Israel said to Samuel, "Do not cease to cry out to the Lord our God for us, and pray that he may save us from the hand of the Philistines." So Samuel took a suckling lamb and offered as a whole burnt offering to the Lord. Now, we don't do animal sacrifice anymore. We don't do that. But hear this as they're taking their best. They're taking what gives them life. They're taking their future security, food, and they're giving that up. They're giving their best to their idea of what the divine is to God. And Samuel cried out to the Lord for Israel, and the Lord answered him. As Samuel was offering up the burnt offering, the Philistines drew near to attack Israel, but the Lord thundered with a mighty voice that day against the Philistines and threw them into confusion, and they were routed before Israel. And the men of Israel went out of Mizpah and pursued the Philistines and struck them down as far as beyond Beth-kar. Okay, so they won. They confessed that they were off track, and they were attacked, and they offered their best to God, and they had a victory. And so in their understanding of the way they have a relationship with the divine, they saw everything that happened, and they saw that they won, and they saw that God must be in this. They saw God at work in their lives. Well, then Samuel took a stone and set it up between Mizpah and Jeshanah, and named it Ebenezer, for he said, "Thus far the Lord has helped us." He took a rock. That's how they celebrated this victory. They took a rock. Now, I have a rock here. Now, who brings a prop to a podcast? You can't see it. But here, I have it in my hand. It's like 15, 20 pounds. And this is a rock that I have pulled out during worship. And I've called this Ebenezer, in honor of the story, or in remembrance of this story. And I talk about how we need to mark those places in our lives when we see God working. No matter how we perceive God, no matter how we understand it, we need to mark it, we need to recognize it, we need to acknowledge it. And so when there's a milestone in the life of this congregation, I pull out this rock and say, God has been with us this far. They made an altar, and it's just a rock. So it's like those kits at Meijer. Like there's this impulse. We want to mark it. We want to say something special is happening. We want to acknowledge it, and we want to move forward. Now we don't stay by the rock. We don't worship the rock. We don't hover around the rock. We place the rock so that when we come back by the rock, it can be a physical reminder of what God has done. Now, when I walked into Charlotte's house, she has a space set up that has religious items and pictures and words. And I asked her what it was, and I just wondered what she called it. If it's a shrine or if it's an altar, if it's a devotional space. So I asked her, if you listened on the last week's episode, what is that? And she says, that's Chuck, referring to her late husband. So she's placed those things so that those physical reminders can be for her the presence of the love of God that she experienced through her husband. When you experience the divine, when you experience that divine love, mark it. Whatever your understanding of God in your space, whatever your understanding of God in your stage of life, acknowledge it. And why not formally make an altar? Whether it's a rock that you give a name and you walk by that rock and remember it, or whether it's a Bible, or whether it's a picture. See, there's all kinds of ways to do this. And we already sort of do it anyway. We have a significant life event, or we have something that we enjoy, or something that happens in our lives, and we take pictures. We take tons of pictures on our phones, and we post it on Facebook and Instagram. And don't get me wrong, I really like Facebook and Instagram. I love being connected to friends and family all across the globe. I love being connected to colleagues and seeing what they're doing. But it's not the same as an altar when we mark that time. See, Facebook and Instagram are altars to ourselves. They're ways to venerate our own lives. Even though I love seeing other people's lives, but when we have our own site, it's about us. But when we are trying to connect to the divine, we're trying to be that moth. We're trying to connect to the thing that is behind it all, the thing that connects all of us, the thing that is the truest true. And so I'm suggesting that we mark those moments, we mark our lives with objects that remind us of that thing that we're trying to strive for. Now I have this drawer in my office that I've just cleared out because I've packed it all in my whole office into boxes because I am moving soon. But in that drawer, it used to lock, and the things I kept in that drawer were those very things, those things that reminded me of the divine, those things that reminded me of God. And I could unlock that drawer and open it and look at them and pick those objects up and remind myself of the love of God, of the underlying reality that binds us all. Now, I'm not going to tell you what's in my drawer because that's just me. I don't want to set up a standard or a kit or a way of dividing us. What are the things that remind you of the eternal? But I am a big fan of using top shelves for this purpose too. In my office, there is the top shelf, and I put things up there that, well, it's not good for books because I don't have good access to the top shelf for books. So I put things that are meaningful. I put pictures up there, and I put little gifts that people have given me, the things that remind me of relationships, of love. And I put those up there, and I see them on a daily basis, and I'm grounded and I'm reminded. The top shelf in my home has a few things that I'm willing to share. There's a Celtic cross. It reminds me of Jesus, of the sacrifice that he made, of him pouring out his life, but also reminds me of the trip that I took to Ireland, my wife Diane, in the year 2000. And then there's, on that top shelf at home, there's a sculpture from my friends Gene and Carolyn, and it's loops, interconnecting loops that is supposed to represent the Holy Spirit. And on that shelf, there's also a nativity scene that's carved from olive wood. And my pastor and mentor, Harry, who is not with us in this life anymore, has passed on, but he brought that from the Holy Land, and he put that into a silent auction to raise money. It was a silent auction, and I bid on it because I really wanted it. But that was back when I had so little resources. And my friends, the Phillips, saw that I had put my name on the silent auction and that I was outbid, and they secured it, and they gave it to me as a gift because they wanted me to have it. So that nativity scene reminds me of the birth of Jesus, and it also reminds me of Pastor Harry, and it also reminds me of my friends, the Phillips. And then the last thing I have up there is a wooden cutout of the words "Hold On." My friend Ivan made that for me. He made that based on a sermon I gave once. It meant something to him, so he made the cutout, and now he gave it to me, and now it means even more to me now. So I look at that, and I'm reminded of the love of God, and I'm reminded of the love of my friends, and so that connects me. As long as we have these things, as long as they remind us of that love, of those relationships that give us a knowledge of love and of connection, they're useful and good. But when we look at an object and it no longer reminds us of anything, it just becomes an object that is to be maneuvered around or dusted or just in the way, then it's time to let those things go. Because we don't worship the object. We keep the object so that it reminds us of the thing that holds us all together. It reminds us of the divine. It reminds us of God and God's love for us, and then it reminds us to love each other. There's this saying in the Buddhist tradition that, if a raft is good for crossing the river, but once you cross the river, you don't drag the raft along with you. You leave it behind. So these things, these objects, this rock that I lift up in church and I call it Ebenezer, it's just a rock. It's just a piece of granite in the shape of a giant kidney. But for a time, when I would pull out that rock, people would know that I was going to say, God is with us. And it was a good reminder. And now I'll move on, and I'll set the rock someplace, and somebody might remember that I said something, but most people will just see it as a chunk of granite sitting outside. And that's fine. We need to use the symbols that work for us. So how's it with you today? How have you experienced God? And how can you creatively remember that, commemorate that, so that you're reminded that the holy is right where you are? Talk to you next time.